What makes this one of the most iconic race cars ever designed? And how did it fare in its first and only race? Find out on One of a Kind, right now. The art of the dual-purpose race car belongs to a different era. Today, you'll never see a stock car peel off the track and drive home. You'll never see anyone drive their street car onto the Indianapolis 500. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when racing cars were street cars. There was a time when you could drive straight from your home to the track. And those days resulted in one of the most stunning, iconic Ferraris ever to grace this street and the track. This is the story of one of the rarest Ferraris on Earth. It's the story of a moment in history when form and function reached its inevitable zenith. This is the story of the 1962 Ferrari 330 GTO. Auto racing has always tried to be a sport that everyone can enjoy. To that end, the establishment of the stock car was a necessary rule that helped establish the early sport. It was one thing to watch cars race that didn't look like anything but an engine and wheels. It was fun, but it wasn't something that everyone could relate to. So tour organizers established rules that forced racers to use modified versions of existing cars. Cars that looked like something anyone might drive. But racers quickly ran into the limits of what a standard chassis could do. Qualities that make cars great on the racetrack are the same qualities that make them impossible to drive on the street. In 1960, the ability to make the ultimate dual-purpose race car was within reach. In 1960, automotive endurance racing was dominated by one name: Ferrari. The 3-liter Ferrari 250 TR, driven by Olivier Jean-Bien, won Le Mans in 1960 and 1961. It was a dominant racer, designed to blow every other competitor off the track. Its lineage goes all the way back to 1954 with the introduction of the Europa GT at the Paris Auto Show. When racing raised the limit to 4-liter engines, Ferrari went to the TR as a template. He expanded the chassis to accommodate the larger engine, and the result was one of the great combinations of form and function in modern history.
The term GTO means Gran Turismo Omologato. That's the Italian way of saying homologated. What this term meant, this is a racing term that means essentially it's a production car. It's a car that a consumer could, in essence, go buy. And thus it was thrilling for consumers to watch it race because they could see themselves at the wheel. At the time, 100 cars had to be made for it to be considered homologated. Of course, manufacturers were well known to cheat in this regard, and Enzo Ferrari was really good at it.
Just 39 examples of the GTO coupe were produced, but this incredible car is rarer still.
The car is actually quite rare. It's of the 39 GTOs ever built, it's one of only 3 that was built with a 4-liter engine.
The 330 GTO is so rare, it's almost impossible to find anything about it in any of the books about Ferrari. Essentially what it was is the iconic 250 GTO with the larger 4-liter engine. It had disc brakes, marvelous performance. It was a rare masterpiece.
All GTOs were built to race, but were theoretically street-ready because of rules that required road versions of competition cars. In 1962, 4-liter engines were eligible to run in the experimental class, so Ferrari fitted a number of 250 GT chassis with the competition 4-liter engine. Originally listed as a Type 330 GT experimental, this Ferrari maintained many of the visual and mechanical characteristics of the other GTOs from that year. The main exception was the modifications made to the body to accommodate the monster 4-liter V12. This included a large hump on the hood to accommodate 6 twin-throated Weber carbs, and closable D-shaped vents to provide additional ventilation for the larger engine.
The 250 GTO and its cousin, the 330, were the last of the great front-engine racing sports cars. At that time, all Formula One cars had moved to the mid-engine. Within a year, 2 years, all racing sports cars would move to the mid-engine. That's one of the reasons why this racing sports car is so iconic, that long nose suggesting terrific amounts of power.
Ferrari decided to use an enhanced version of the Colombo engine used in the 250 GT for the 400 Super America. This increased bore and stroke, but only slightly increased the size of the power plant compared to the 250 GT engine.
When the car was built, they actually built this car with the 4-liter engine. They did that to run Le Mans. They did that because at some of the tracks that were being run at that time, Le Mans, Nürburgring, and places like that with really long straightaways, this 4-liter engine that was in the car originally would really come into play on those long straightaways.
The racing part of this Ferrari's life came to an abrupt end in its very first race. It didn't even complete its first lap in the 1962 Le Mans race before careening off course and out of contention. But the street part of its life was just getting started. In 1962, Ferrari modified one of its prized racing GTOs to accommodate a larger 4-liter Colombo engine. The hope was its 375 horsepower would give it a huge advantage in the long straightaways at Le Mans and Nürburgring. But the dream was not to be.
The car doesn't have a lot of history compared to most race cars. Probably what it's most noted for is the fact that it ran Le Mans in 1962, and it is, of the 3 4-liter GTOs ever built, this is the only one ran at Le Mans by the factory. It did not finish the race. Early on in the race, Michael Parks had stuffed the car into a sandbank, which inevitably created a lot of heating problems, and they ended up dropping out of the race. But during the time it ran quite well.
Ferrari modified its street design in order to qualify for the European endurance racing circuit.
It's alleged that after Le Mans, when this car was entered into the European hill climb events, that this car actually won the Sicilian hill climb in 1963. I really don't know that that's true, but I know that it was quite successful in running the hill climb events.
After its original 4-liter engine was replaced with a 3-liter in order to qualify for the hill racing circuit, the GTO 330 found its way into the hands of an American racing enthusiast who drove it on the street as his everyday car.
When we acquired the car, someone prior to us had done some significant changes to the front end. The 3 air scoops you see below the hood were missing, and that had been replaced with a single narrow slot. 2 of the air scoops just below the windshield had also been removed.
When it was rediscovered, the new owners researched the history of the car. They wanted to honor the original configuration, as built by Ferrari himself.
We wanted to restore the car to its original condition that it ran at Le Mans, and that's the way you see it today.
The Le Mans 24 Hours has some of the most dangerous, dramatic driving in the motor racing calendar. The race was the fastest ever.
From the time that we actually acquired the car until we received it back in the condition you see it now, was actually several years, probably a good 3 years, and just hundreds and hundreds of man-hours of work to put this thing back to where you see it. A lot of that was serious research to make sure that we had everything right.
In 1962, the price for a new GTO was about $22,000, which is equivalent to over $168,000 today. This may have limited the production run.
To source parts for a car like this is sometimes impossible. There are cases where you actually have to manufacture parts because they built so few of these. They were one-off type cars. Each one of these cars is actually different. Even though they built 39 of these total, there are no 2 that are exactly alike. So depending on what you're looking for, you may very well have to manufacture a part if you can't find it.
The results are hard to argue with. The restored GTO 330 drives like the perfect balance between raw racing performance and the smooth, responsive experience you would expect from a Ferrari.
The car, for being a race car, is an unbelievably smooth car. To drive it is something that you really need to experience. It's one of the smoothest cars you'll ever drive. It's very nimble. It's just beautiful. It sounds good. It just feels right when you drive this car.
Representing the ultimate in racing form and practical street function, where does this Ferrari 330 GTO rank among the rarest cars in the world? We'll find out right after this. Built in the era of race cars designed to rule the track and the road, the Ferrari 330 GTO represents the ultimate fusion of performance, style, and function. Although its racing career was brief, the 330 GTO became the standard by which all high-performance cars would be judged. To this day, the 330 GTO is among the most iconic Ferraris ever produced.
What makes this car so unique is that of the few cars that they built to begin with, only 3 had the 4-liter engine. Of those 3, this is the only one that Ferrari built with that 4-liter engine to run Le Mans. And that really makes this a unique car.
The 1962 Ferrari 330 GTO remains an example of a bygone era, when an automobile could be a race car and still be a functional street car, when limited production runs created a series of all-time classics. That's why this Ferrari 330 GTO remains absolutely one of a kind.